Hello, welcome to Season 9 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. The theme of this season is 100 Years of Horror. We're going to watch two horror movies from every decade, from 1920 to 2020, in chronological order. We want to see where horror came from, how it's changed, and maybe even make some predictions about where it's going. If you want to see the full list of movies we'll be reviewing this season and follow along, then check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Can you believe we're at the end of Season 9?
I didn't know if this was the end of Season 9 or the beginning of Season 10. I just kind of went with it.
Just along for the ride?
Yeah, man. It's not that bad, you know?
Yeah. But this is it. This is the end of our journey through 100 years of horror. We have watched two movies from every decade, from the 1920s to the 2020s, and it's just kind of mind-boggling how far things have come. And next week we'll do like a quick recap episode, kind of getting into all of that. But I thought it was worthwhile here in the beginning just to call out, like, this is kind of a special time. We made it. This has been a journey. It's been fun. Also, I really screwed up.
Uh-oh.
So, I went and saw this movie in the theater, and I was, like, super hyped for it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was also available on HBO Max.
Yeah.
Since I was in the movie theater, I didn't take notes.
Yes. Go on.
Last night, when I went to watch it and take notes,
Yes.
It was no longer on HBO Max.
Yes, that's the exact same thing I went through, and I didn't want to say anything, but now that I know that you went through that too, I feel better about myself.
Sweet. Okay, so short episode today.
So what I did was I watched a couple other YouTubers that like there's one where it's supposed to like the ending explained, but they didn't explain it. They just recapped the whole movie. And I don't know if they like had to do that for YouTube terms and services or whatever, but it was like, okay, yep, I remember that. Okay, I remember that. Like I was like, okay, this is good. I got this.
And then you proceeded to not send me that. Much appreciated.
Well, hey, I didn't want to. I have to hide that I watch these movies right before sometimes. Yeah. I was embarrassed, but now that I know that you make mistakes too, it's all I'll do it from here on out.
Yeah. Well, and so instead of watching YouTube, I watched I guess it was like a mini documentary on HBO Max called Faith and Fear, The Conjuring Universe. And it kind of walked through all of the movies that are in the Conjuring universe in the order that they happen, like chronologically. So not the order that they were made, but like how they fit into the whole story of it, which was really kind of interesting. And so instead of doing like my normal introduction, I was just going to bring up a couple of things that I liked from that.
Yeah.
And then figured you could do your fun facts and we'll get into it. But the one thing I did want to mention before I go into that is I looked up the box office stuff on this one because I was really curious, because it feels like just kind of getting back into a world where movie theaters are kind of relevant again, where you hear about movies being released in the theater and getting lots of advertising behind it, people talking about going to the theater again. But I was really curious with this one because it's been such a successful franchise, but also just sort of the way things are in society right now, and then so many people having the option to watch it at home, like how it was going to do. And it was made on a budget of $38 million. Which is just crazy for a horror movie, and the fact that we're on that scale after some of the ones we started with watching from the 20s is amazing in and of its own right. But this brought in over $170 million at the box office already. And I think it's still playing in some places.
Yeah.
And so, 1, movies are back. 2, horror movies are as relevant as ever and still a big deal. Right. And it warms my cold, dark soul.
It does, yeah. What's fun, what's kind of funny about this is like, I feel like, because you said it was $38 million to make this.
Yeah.
I feel like it should have been more just from like Vera and Patrick's like their negotiations.
They should be getting paid more.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, realistically, like they could try changing up, but like that's who Ed and Lorraine Warren are. To all of us. Like, that's so common to see them. You see them in a movie together, what that's about. So they must have got money on the back end or something.
yeah, I'm sure they get all kinds of other revenue streams out of this.
Yeah.
But one thing I really liked about that documentary was they brought Lorraine Warren in. She's still alive, and had her talk a lot. And they showed some clips of like her on the set with Vera. And sounds like she's been like fairly involved.
Yeah, she has.
With the making of these movies. And then they also played had like a lot of pictures of Ed and kind of talked about him a lot too. And then it seemed like they have actual exorcists on set for most of these movies, really? Which I wouldn't really have guessed. But it kind of started with like a priest talking about how the spirit world doesn't really know the difference between you pretending to invoke darkness and you actually doing it. Mm-hmm. And so how like filming these types of movies can be dangerous because it's like activating the same types of stuff. And the fact that they've had the priests, and there was one scene, I think it was from Annabelle Creation maybe, where they showed him like the room with the pages of the Bible all over the walls. That was like the interior closet with her little like chair in it. And the priest was just like, that looks pretty dark. And the guy was just like, yeah, pretty scary even without the doll. Haha, awkward. Mm-hmm. And you wonder like, what is the dynamic when that guy's on the set? You know, they're specifically to prevent all the things that they're making a movie about. But it was cool to see like that view and to hear James Wan talk. And one thing that really stood out to me about what he was saying was that, you know, he talked about originally making The Conjuring. It was meant to be a standalone, just kind of old school horror movie that was really drawing on like the haunted house genre. And that he really thought that was something at the time that could be rebooted and done in like a really fresh and exciting way. Mm-hmm. But then as they've done all of these other movies in the universe, like The Nun and Annabelle and other stuff, he was really trying to get into other subgenres of horror and to work with people who were excited about doing those. And so, like, The Nun, for example, was based on a lot of, like, the gothic medieval style horror films. And so a lot of the way that they designed and built up that movie was by looking back on a lot of movies more in that genre. And so he said, like, basically, he doesn't want to make the same movie twice. He wants to do them in a way that is interesting and fresh every time, but also like deeply seated in one area of the horror genre, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's 2 of the 3 facts I had you just said. So
cool.
We only got 1 left. So what else do you got?
I'll shut up.
No. Was it that 30-minute was it 30 minutes on the HBO?
Yes.
Okay, I saw that when I was searching for, for the movie. Yeah. I didn't watch it. Sounds like I should have. But yeah, I was wondering if that's what it was.
Yep. So, what was your remaining fact?
So the remaining fact I have is, that although the legal proceedings were not shown in the case, the judge of the Johnson trial rejected the defense plea of not guilty by demonic possession, saying that would be impossible to prove, basically, and that stating that it would be irrelative and unscientific to allow testimony to support a possession defense. The jury were not legally allowed to consider the demonic possession defense, and Johnson's lawyers then instead argued self-defense, and ultimately pled guilty, like you kind of find out in the movie. First-degree manslaughter in 1981 and was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in jail. He only served 5 due to good behavior, and he got married to Debbie in prison. I thought it was kind of interesting, but I did like my thought is, like, if you want to survive in today's world, in anything, like, you gotta constantly be evolving. So when you're talking, with the James Wan wanting to kind of get away from the haunted, that makes sense. Like, that was definitely a good foundation that they started, and then they decided to change it up a little bit, and I gotta say, like, I get excited when I'm going to watch and I've said this 1,000 times, but when I go to watch a horror movie that's supposed to be a freaking horror movie, like, that's what it's about. Yeah. It might not be the greatest, but at least they're saying, this is a horror, this is what it's gonna be, and this is what we're gonna do. And and they did it. And so for that alone, I respect them.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that we've talked about a lot this season is kind of the difference between like horror that's meant to scare you and then like Hollywood horror that's supposed to be accessible entertainment. And I had kind of worried going into this movie that with as much success as the Conjuring universe has had and as much critical acclaim, and it is the way these movies just all pump out money and people get excited and go see them, you know, are we going to start seeing these veer a little bit more into that world of Hollywood horror where it's kind of the more predictable character archetypes and happy endings and, you know, dance numbers, music, you know, just all the stuff that is sort of the familiar Hollywood thing where they kind of take the teeth out of the horror and make it a lot more accessible to a lot more people. And another thing that came up in that little documentary that I watched was I got kind of worried because at the beginning he was talking about how he felt like James Wan was talking about it. He felt like the relationship between Ed and Lorraine is supposed to be like this really warm contrast to all the dark and cold evil in the rest of the movie. And so holding that up as like a contrast makes the dark and the evil seem like more intense. And I'm like, ooh, does that mean they're going to play like more into making kind of love story type movies in the future and stuff? But then later on, he talked about it's very important in horror movies that you care about the characters. And he said, like, I've created, you know, this world with this couple and they're really warm together. And if you really like them, then I can put them into any situation I want and I've got you. Hey. And I was like, that's brilliant. You know what I mean? Because we've talked about how a lot of times in horror movies, a problem that we have is that there is a love story or there's like an adventure story or something, and that really becomes the focus, and the horror is just kind of like set dressing. Yeah. But the fact that he's using that, which is like a familiar thing that people resonate with, to accentuate the horror and to make it scarier and to make you connect with them so that he can scare you more effectively, I'm just like, yeah, this guy gets it. That's why I like his movies. Yeah,
no, that makes complete sense because he does have, you know, like with the ending in the gazebo and stuff like that. And, you could definitely see that. I just I get so frustrated now just with the podcast. Like I wouldn't otherwise, but just because we got to pay attention to them, you know, where you have this is a freaking drama.
Yes.
And okay, you have a couple of jump scares, like, you know. Yeah.
You get a 10-minute horror payoff in the end after 2 hours of,
It gets so insulting, you know, and so, and here's the other thing with this, you know, because I've watched all the Conjuring universe films, Annabelle, The Nun, I mean, all of it, and, I was honestly expecting, and I don't know if it's because it was put out to HBO Max before, or like and then theaters or what, but I just was almost expecting like a, you know, direct to DVD type film.
Sure, like a lower budget type thing.
Because, you know, we're still in that like strange world of like not having the movie theaters, you know, movie theaters, like you said earlier, coming back, but, you know, it was just like ingrained. Yeah. That it's like, oh, this is not, but then I watched it and it's like, holy shit. Like, I think even like after our next podcast, I was like, hey, you need to watch this. Like,
yes.
You know.
Yeah. And that was one thing that I had a similar thought on was, you know, what will the experience be like with this one? And in going to see it in the theater, my hope was, you know, after all this time that we've sat at home and like waited for movies to come back, they've had that time to work on this one. Because I think most of it was already filmed and shot and wrapped by the time pandemic hit. So they had a lot of time to work on like post stuff. And just the idea of going back to the theater and seeing a high budget movie that is in a very successful franchise that has like a lot of hype around it, that has a director or producer at least who I'm liking more and more the more I find out about him, and to experience it in that, you know, like surround sound, dark theater, I was just so excited. And that's why I was a little worried then, because, you know, I can't have a good attitude about anything. I just assume everything's going to fall apart. And so I was worried it was going to be like super Hollywood. But I feel like it stayed very true to the horror genre. Yeah. But it also worked out a lot of things that I think weren't done particularly well in previous Conjuring movies. In that I thought the CG, for the most part, was light years ahead of any of the previous ones.
Yep. Yeah, there's no argument against that at all. And now that you say it, I bet it was because they had a little bit of extra time to work on this stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, usually I wouldn't say special effects, but the computer generated stuff in these movies is a liability.
Yeah.
Like, you have to almost look past it. And then in this one, it was like on point the whole way through, with the one exception of like when she was on the cliff's edge and he was running forward to pull her back.
Yeah.
That looked super fake.
Yeah.
But all of the rest of it with like the monsters, demons and things, that all worked really, really well. And I also really appreciated the sound. I felt like they actually took advantage of that surround sound kind of theater style, and it was a thing that I noticed, which was really positive.
Here's the thing too, as far as the content goes of this film too, it's not that I'm not the biggest fan of Conjuring 2. Conjuring 2 or like The Nun, they're definitely not my most favorite. And so when we learned that they're wanting to kind of get away from the haunted house thing, and my thought of like The Nun, I appreciate it. It's just not one of my favorites. It was a little boring and stuff. That had me a little concerned. I was like, well, but if what you're doing with The Nun is where you're trying to take this, like, that's kind of a bummer, like this is going to be a letdown. But it was almost like they took the mistakes that they kind of made with that boring, long sections of talking kind of thing. They took it away and just kind of, times two'd it in a way. They just amped it up, and I really appreciated like that work. I actually didn't have I didn't really have a complaint with this film. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think I needed, like, this was almost what we needed. I needed a new horror film.
Yeah, right.
That no one really
excited about.
Yeah, we knew it was coming out. We knew that much, but hadn't done crazy research on it or anything, and it was like, oh, this is like for horror fans, this is like our getting back to this new normal that life will be. They're still gonna make some pretty stellar horror films, and
it was fun. Like I really enjoyed watching this movie, like every piece of it.
Yeah,
and it was interesting because you said that it didn't really have like those slow parts.
Yeah.
And I think that the way they unfolded the story was, most of it felt kind of like that race against time.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times with a more like haunted house type movie,
you wait.
It ends up, it's like you have like the nighttime scary parts and then the daytime that they're just advancing the story. Yeah. But this one had like those added elements of reasons why you had anxiety even during the day as they were looking through stuff. And so that was cool. And it kept it moving. And I thought it was really interesting that the plot was kind of around someone actively attacking them.
Yep.
Like they kept finding those little witch totems that are clearly like on the offensive. And that's from another human. You know what I mean? That's not just some like dark unseen force. That's like another person that's actively out to get you. And so just, closing the portal to the other world or putting the doll in the cabinet is not going to solve the problem. Like, it's going to continue to be an issue. And especially the way that the Satanist girl, whose name I can't remember, was able to see Lorraine when she was like in her psychic vision and stuff. That was just like this whole new element that hadn't shown up yet in the previous movies that I thought was like really scary, that added an additional element of danger. So it felt very fresh, in addition to also being like fast moving.
Well, and that was one thing that I was reading about, that they were talking with Lorraine, how they really wanted to navigate the clairvoyant, like her clairvoyancy, if that's it.
That was a much bigger part of this movie for sure.
And they were really wanting to do that. And what's funny now that I knew that, and I was doing research and like trying to figure out like when Ed and Lorraine passed away, just all this stuff. I noticed a lot more like clairvoyant, the word clairvoyant being listed when it was associated to her. Which, could have just been really good advertising, but I just thought that was kind of interesting to get down. I mean, you knew that she had this ability, but it's like almost like amped up superpower kind of thing. Yeah. And here's the thing I also want to make very clear with this film. I get frustrated with like based on true stories. Like it's almost like these people passed out. The movie was so scary. We've talked about that over,
Sure.
especially over this decade.
Yeah.
Or the 100 years of horror. But, I kind of get fed up a little bit with like, oh, this is based on a true story. But in this case, it was like, I get that it's not, I'm not a believer in ghosts and stuff like that. And I get that it's not, like, I almost see it like as a superpower, and I'm okay with this because, like, these are characters that...
Sure, yeah, this is not a documentary.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, yeah, I'm 100% okay that she can do that because, for me, as a person, I just want to see some good action. That's what it was, and that helped provide that action that I needed for this film. Like when they're in the morgue, and she's holding the hand...
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden see this big guy coming, and Ed takes off running and like saves her. Like those are the kind of things that yeah, that wasn't directly her clairvoyance, but she was in the realm, whatever you want to call it, at that point, and so you have like these two intense moments because it's intense what she's going through, and then you have him seeing like this big dude coming. And the other thing which I really liked about this was he was the hero, but not because he took out the bad guy, like straight up. He didn't physically fight him at this point. Mm-hmm. He took her hand off of the dead person's hand because he knew that would kind of stop. It was just like almost like a mental thing that they had going. It was just like, damn, that's like really interesting. Like there's no way Ed could have beat that guy. Like it was a huge, giant, brute strength monster, and it was just really well thought out, the writing and the filming to make that action happen, make him the hero without being like the atypical, like, I gotta go beat up this guy. Like I read recently where The Rock has it in his contract where you can't lose a fight kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not this case. It was Ed saying, "Oh hell, I can't beat this guy up, but I can stop it by getting her hand off." And I just really like that thought and input in this. And
like his desperation.
Yeah.
It was cool. And so another thing that we've talked about that we've seen, be fairly common in the history of horror movies is like that scary scene in the beginning before it kind of resets and establishes the story and moves on from there. This one had a pretty damn intense beginning.
It did.
So that scene, and I was curious if it hit you as hard, but where the hand comes up out of the waterbed and grabs the kid.
Oh, yeah.
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 Little known fact, I slept on a waterbed until I was 30 years old.
I had one in my mid-20s. for
No
years.
regrets.
Yeah. I would have one right now,
that
honestly.
was also terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like perfect. Like that's... Okay, you've seen the face this is why I say perfect. Like you've seen the scenes where there's the face in the background of the window, or like in Insidious, and you see that. This is like a new version of that. It's like him just plopping down a waterbed. Yeah, it's weird that the bed's already there. Don't give a shit though. Mm-hmm. He's on it. Something's coming. You just know it's coming, and all of a sudden you see it, and you're just like, oh, that's gives you chills.
That's something that I think is good movie making. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily good writing so much as it is good movie making. When, like you said, it's coming and it still gets executed in a way that scares you. And so this one I think was kind of full of that type of stuff, and the Conjuring series in general kind of does a lot of that. But.
What's funny is I was thinking when watching, like, if it affected you more because of the waterbed, knowing that you had yours for years, and with my parents, they had theirs until I moved out and took theirs. I got them another bed. Anyway, long story short, like waterbeds are a part of both of our lives, so it was like, oh, we both know what this is going to be like. Going to
a waterbed is great because it cuddles you even when you're sleeping alone.
Yeah, but let me give everyone. That's sad. Let me give everyone a tip though. Here's my sad story. I'm a bigger guy, 6'1", about 250, and if you have a friend that you guys come back to the bar and you're wasted and you have like this huge, California king size waterbed. You're like, hey man, just pass out on the other side. I'll pass out on this side. See you in the morning kind of thing, and he's 5'6", a smaller person. You wake up and you're ass to ass with him because you weigh so much that his side lifts
like
up and then he rolls down.
Yeah.
That happened. So just for the record, be careful about that, if waterbeds ever come back.
Yeah. Yeah. So the only thing I had that was kind of like a what if with this movie was, well, one, there were some things about the story that didn't seem like they flowed together super well to me. Mm-hmm. And so one reason I want to watch it again is to see if, like, I just missed some stuff, which is totally possible, right? Yeah. Like watching it in the theater, and not taking notes. But it was weird to me that there was no mystery about whether or not Arnie was possessed.
Yeah.
So, like, that was a very clear thing that happened in the beginning. So going through the trial and everything, you were never, even though all the characters outside of Ed and Lorraine were like, well, maybe he is, maybe he just killed the guy, like, maybe they'll convince us, maybe not. You as an audience member 100% knew. Mm-hmm. And that was necessary for a lot of other things in the story. But I just kind of wondered if they could have done it in a way that made you question it a little more through more of the movie to kind of keep that, like, mystery investigation thing. Because if I remember right, that was a pretty big part of Conjuring 2, mm-hmm. where even the Warrens weren't entirely convinced that the possession was real. And so maybe they already did it and they didn't feel the need to do it again. But that was just one thing that stood out to me, is almost feeling a little bit more like action. Yeah. And not as much like an investigation on the Warrens, even though they were kind of looking into who did the possession, I guess. Right. So. Yeah. But anyway, I had to find something to bring up that wasn't perfect. So
yeah, anyway. Yeah, this definitely it. But also at the end of the day, it's not. It was just a perfect scenario for us. Like yes, it was. Agreed. We were wrapping up 100 years of horror. We haven't seen a movie in the theater in years, or if it feels like years in about a year. And I don't know, just a new one came out. Here's the other exciting thing is it's like. Granted, it's in this universe, so there's like 1,000 of these Conjuring films, it feels like. Yeah. But technically the third, Conjuring, and if we're going to base this off of other third films, like it's like, oh, you guys did extremely well. Even like Rocky, which is like one of my favorite series, like the third was okay, but not nearly as good as the first two or the fourth, and so it's like, you just feel like sometimes the quality goes down, and in this, instead of saying, hey, quality's not going to go down, not only that, we're going to take it up a notch and execute it well. Boy, they kind of hit the jackpot on that,
Yeah, and I think a big reason behind that is because James Wan and everybody else involved with making these is just like a legit hardcore fan of horror. Yeah. Like, they love it. You know what I mean? And so they're not trying to make money. They're trying to make, yeah.
But they're the money
they're trying to make good horror movies that are things that they would like. And I think that plays a big part of it in keeping it, fresh. That you've got all those original, his vision kind of guiding the whole thing, and it hasn't just been handed off to some other director.
I wonder if it is easier to make something knowing, like, hey, regardless, we're going to make money. So let's just go for it. Yeah. You think it would. Yeah. Overall, anyway, very impressed with it.
Yeah, and it just, kind of in summary, it was interesting because in the old movies, like in the 20s and 30s and 40s, it really seemed like they were either like trying to be deeply scary and disturbing, or they were just complete Hollywood pop that wasn't actually scary. Mm-hmm. And now, at the end of all of this, at the end of our journey through the 100 years of horror, we end with The Conjuring 3, which absolutely does both. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it is a big, huge sensation. It made a lot of money. It was made at a very high level. It had a great budget and great special effects and good acting, and like everything was there. But it was also like a really sold out horror movie, and that's cool. Yeah. It's cool that that's where we are now with horror.
Yeah, 100%. Also, James Wan, I know you're listening to this. Feel free to come on to the podcast.
Anytime.
Yeah. And hey, bring the CEO of Real Good.
Yes, Real Good, who informed me yesterday to my horror. that this movie was not available for streaming anywhere.
I actually said same, but that's not true. I just was so cocky. I just like, it's on there. Let's watch it. And we were looking forward to it. Was the thing that killed me.
Same. Yeah.
We were wanting to watch it again, not for the podcast, just to watch it. It was like, oh shit.
Yeah. I had gotten all the chores done. I had gone to the grocery store. We had made dinner. I was settled in. I was ready to flip the movie on, and it was not there. Yeah. It was heartbreaking. But yeah, we made it. This was a great way to end, and we'll be back next week with a recap of season 9.
Yeah.
And we're excited to look back on all these movies.
Yes, sir.
Correction, we're excited to look back on some of these movies.
Yeah, that's very true.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening. Okay, so we went and saw this movie in the theater, right?
Yeah.
And, hadn't been... What's that?
Which theater?
Oh, Alamo Drafthouse, obviously.
Yeah. That was a stupid question, sorry.
Yeah. And we actually hadn't gotten to go the weekend that I wanted to because it was sold out. So, that was when I was just like, oh, hell yeah. But we go back, and we get there, and we sit down, and I felt... You know how sometimes you just get, a weird feeling?
Yeah.
And before we left, I went back and I got my pocket knife and I put it in my pocket. And I was like, as I was walking to the car, I was like, why did I do that? They're not even, will they even let me in? Because it's the one that clips on the outside of my pocket and stuff. And I was like, why? I'm not that guy. Why did I do that? It was just kind of weird. So then we get to the theater and we go in and we sit down and, I'm not the type of person tap my foot, but I kept doing that.
Anxious tap?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if it was just because I was seeing a horror movie for the first time, or if it was they at this point they aren't doing the 2 seats reserved in between all the occupied seats thing at Alamo anymore.
Okay.
So I thought maybe I'm just weirded out because there are people closer to me than I'm used to or something. And as we're watching it, I had the hardest time focusing. And so we grew up over the course of our lives, tragedies have happened with shootings, right? So we were old enough to know what was going on and to be scared when Columbine happened.
Right.
And the West Virginia shooting and Aurora, Colorado at the movie theater and that concert in Las Vegas, it seems every however many years, some big deal happens. And that's just always kind of been a part of our life. Mm-hmm. And since I was a kid, I have often really thought about that when I'm in a confined space. It's just part of a reflex. I see where the exits are. I see where people come in and out. And it's just a thing kind of in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. And it used to be real bad, when I was in high school and college and even going to concerts and stuff for a while after that. But that hasn't even crossed my mind in probably 10 years. But that was constant in my head. And at Alamo, they have the waiters and waitresses that come in and out as they're bringing people food and stuff. And it was just immediately, that would catch my attention every time they came in. And I was even, at one point I caught myself thinking, if a shooter came in, should I empty my drink before I throw it, or should I just throw it?
Right.
I'm what the hell is going on in my brain?
Just throw it for the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm here in this movie that I'm super excited about, in a franchise I really like, and I'm eating popcorn. This should be the happiest I've been, but I'm just this ball of anxiety. And it was the weirdest thing, and I could not shake it. And I even on the drive home felt weird. And then the next morning, I woke up to the news report that 14 people had been shot in downtown Austin, a mile from our house the night before.
Yeah.
And that was the freakiest thing to read.
That's crazy.
I cannot say, like, it's got to be coincidence, but it just felt crazy as hell in the moment.
That's intense, man. So, in the future, you get this feeling, what are you going to do? Are you going to continue with your plans?
Go home.
Yeah, that's what I would do. Make new plans.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's intense, dude.
Yeah. That was just one of those things where, like, the whole next day you just feel kind of eerie about everything. So,
did the person who did the shooting die, or did they catch him?
No, it ended up being 2 kids, like high school kids, and they were shooting at each other. They were not trying to do like a mass shooting, and they had arrested one of the guys, and then they found out the guy they arrested wasn't one of the guys, and they haven't got him.
Wow.
But that's also super disturbing. He's like 17 years old, you know.
Sad.
Yeah.
Sad. That's crazy, man.